links below. But I wanted to do a talk about anatomy of a world-class SOC. Bear with me as this is something that I put together fairly quickly in short notice. So I have no idea how long it'll be. If it's short though, I can talk to you guys about UFOs fairly extensively, so we're good on time.
Excellent.
So yeah, just
I'm gonna
go
interrupt
ahead.
for a second. David, have you changed the stream over? Never mind, it just changed. Sorry. Please continue.
Okay. I'm guessing there's a delay in my slides
No, it's in
changing.
YouTube delay, and
Oh, gotcha.
so he's not seeing my sorry attempt at tinkering, but I think we're good.
Okay, cool. Well, basically, for those that don't know me, I built 3 SOCs. One of them was terrible. I will absolutely admit, but I learned a lot from it. And then the other two, what was that?
The first one always is.
Yeah, yeah, it was not great. I learned a ton though. The other two were both significantly better. Outside of that, I've done some SOAR work for a bunch of companies while working at Palo Alto. Managed the playbooks for a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, large federal agencies, including in the intelligence space. So yeah, let's see. So what we're going to talk about today is just simply how to build a world-class SOC. It's not about the tools at all. And I'll show you essentially how you can build um, an amazing SOC using only open source tools while still having a really good user experience. So we're going to focus on the people and processes, and we'll talk about the technology a little bit. So first is the mission statement. This is one that I didn't realize how important it was until I was a SOC manager. And it turns out not a lot of people still know what a SOC does, even if they're really senior in IT, and sometimes even if they're really senior in security. It becomes just a vague catch-all for they do security stuff. And what happens when you don't have a SOC manager to defend your SOC's mission statement, which is, probably going to be detect bad guys, investigate the threats, do that kind of thing. You'll quickly get a bunch of crap work just thrown your way, and it leads to people having a lower opinion of a SOC, or just the personnel in there just not having a good relationship with them, because they're also just doing stuff that they're not really necessarily trained to do, and it's just bad all around. So always defend the mission statement. It can be super simple. I like just saying the SOC is going to do security monitoring of the network, and investigate incidents, and build out detection content and manage our own tools, or something to that effect. And that way, anytime something comes up that's outside of that purview, I can say, no, this is not, this is out of our scope. If we take it on, we're going to have some, teamwork, or higher headcount, whatever it might be. So yeah, super important is the mission statement. Never knew that until I had a SOC role. And also super important to be able to stick up for that mission statement. It's one thing to have one in writing, but you have to also be able to communicate to people, sometimes verbally, to calm down. Here's some beeping. Is there questions? Sorry, I can't really see very well. No? Okay.
I think you're good.
So, okay, cool. So there's some common roles. Don't hold the names of these roles to what the descriptions really describe. But I wanted to put them in here for a few reasons. One, a lot of people haven't heard of roles such as a detection engineer. That's something that's, I guess, not really a new role, but a newer kind of name for a role that might have existed in the past, like a SIM content engineer or something to that effect. But really, I wanted to put this on here for the analyst and engineering call out. So security analyst typically being the team that investigates alerts, the team that would get an alert from the SIM, basically. It has a different skill set. It's more of an investigative skill set than an engineering skill set. And what I find is SOCs specifically that don't have a strong incident response background or forensic background typically really over focus on the engineering piece and rely almost totally on the tools just because they're not familiar with essentially kind of an analyst workflow. And it also leads to people getting hired for roles that they might not necessarily be the best fit for. It's not to say that you can't do both. Obviously, the better you are at one job or the other job, the better you're going to be at both of your jobs. So just wanted to call that out specifically. Engineering, again, is going to focus more on the actual configuration. Detection engineer, that's what I actually am now. So I do cloud threat detection for a Fortune 50 company. And all I do all day long is basically read, well, used to be Twitter, now basically Mastodon, the DFIR report, just do a lot of Googling, research of my own, but I essentially design detection content. And then some other ones, threat intel analyst, literally like 90% of paid threat intel is taken off of Twitter. It's really, really sad. Some of the paid stuff, it's really expensive, but you'll get more stuff around like attribution and you'll get more things that are maybe delivered to your industry vertical so you don't have to do it yourself. And it's also really uncommon to have a lot of these roles. Most organizations, unless they're a security company, may not have the headcount or the budget to have things like a malware reverse engineer or even a detection engineer. But we'll kind of talk about that a little bit and how you can do detection in a kind of easy way, I guess. So also people, go ahead.
Just to interrupt you real quick to go back to your
Mm-hmm.
last slide. You've
Yeah.
got somebody who's building tools, so like folks with hammers actually building Splunk and whatever detection security platforms you have. You've got folks
Right.
Building rules and such in those tools to fire off alerts. And then at the top, you've got folks analyzing the output of those pieces, right? Doing the investigation, like following up when an alert fires.
Yep.
And then you've got these other mushrooms down here that are reading data from social media to generate rules based on stuff from outside the company. And then the reverse engineers, which I guess are doing some combination of the analysis from social media and following up on reverse engineering the stuff that's found internally?
Yeah, so that's almost exactly right. The main thing that I'd really focus on or change would be the threat intel role. That's one that is a real useful skill set to have in a SOC. So the way that those will really work is they're typically broken out into a tactical intel analyst, so someone that's focused on the technical and the weeds, this IP address is related to this crew. And then a more strategic analyst. So this one is going to take that, tactical data and then translate it to the C-suite to help guide detection policy. So a tactical threat intel analyst is going to help drive things like what we should focus on in terms of content, without giving too much away of what we do internally. It could be even so far as if we see another organization that's similar to ours that's been hit with a certain type of malware. Let's say that it might be even like a physical device on something. We'll actually go through and have people search our stores for those, even though we don't have evidence for that. But our threat intel analysts will go through and look for that kind of thing. So that's kind of how it's worked. And then the malware reverse engineers, again, really rare to have, but if you have them, it can make a SOC analyst's life easier because decoding malware is its own skill set in itself, especially whenever you're trying to.
Like understanding what the payload is.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the
threat analyst role then more like wide field coverage? They're not really feeding data back into the other roles. They're more fielding things that the other roles don't cover.
Yeah, so a lot of teams will actually have the tactical threat intel team and the malware team kind of combined, depending on how technical their threat intel team is. Some of them are just old, CIA people that don't have a large technical background, but they're really great at, breaking things down into a strategic thing. But uh, from a technical piece, they typically will work really close together. So, for example, let's say you're targeted by a specific threat actor. You might keep track of what malware they use, and if you have a tool like VirusTotal, or even now VX Underground is something that anyone can access for like $5 a month. You can download their samples, detonate them, take the IOCs, and feed them into your detection. So they do things like that, help you track them, group them, that kind of thing.
Cool. All right. Sorry, I just wanted to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. So the next one is just going to be general stuff. So these are just things that I find as general helpful training. NetworkDefense.io is Chris Sanders' courses, and they are all super awesome, especially for SOC analysts and engineers. They cover tools that you're definitely going to use in a SOC. And they also cover things that are a little harder to find training for. One of my favorite of his courses is the investigation theory course, which doesn't necessarily teach a lot of technical stuff, which it does actually go over some of that. But the real focus is, I have an alert. What do I do? How to write playbooks, that kind of a thing. And it also has some things. Actually, I think I have it pulled up. Can you all still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So it should be the site for some of the courses now. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Yeah. So as you can see, it's they're not expensive. They have things like detection engineering courses, and we'll talk about Sigma later. CyberChef, which is really awesome for decoding like malware payloads. The stuff that you're definitely going to use. One that I'll also recommend is if you're not familiar with doing just basic virtual machines, just even at home in a home lab, this virtual machine course, it'll be really valuable for you in your career, because it'll give you a skill. So whenever you get assigned a task, you can do your own local testing and that kind of a thing. And it just is super helpful. But anyways, all of these courses are not very expensive, but they're super high quality. I've taken a few of them. But anyways, so back to the slides. Books, Intelligence-Driven Incident Response by O'Reilly. That was basically the exact same content as my GCTI, the Threat Intel course, and it actually is even authored by some of the same authors. It more is basically lacking a lot of the hands-on stuff with the tools and some of the what do you call it, labs and stuff that would come with the SANS course. So if you want to pay $50 and get the same information, that's a great way to do it. It's the O'Reilly version. The other one,
Like links and resources at the
end. Yeah, I'll shoot them into the Slack channel when we get off the talk.
I mean, $50, that's hard to pass up.
Yeah, it's really good. I super recommend it. And also Investigating Windows Systems by Harlan Carvey. That's also a really great one. Again, it doesn't necessarily give you real technical, like this is how a process works type of thing. It's more focused on how to build an investigative process. And one of the things that I really got out of it was basically how to think about an intrusion. So the way that I like to break it down is I've become a huge fan of the kill chain, but I've always hated the 5th phase installation, because what does that mean? That doesn't apply to like anything basically. So in my mind, personally, I switch it out with execution and persistence. I have to execute code somehow. So I'm gonna have something involving a process, and you just kind of make notes of I guess the different forensic artifacts that do certain things. Like this is where I would look for persistence. This is where I would look for execution. And as you kind of build that notebook, it'll really help you understand A, how to investigate, incidents, and B, it'll make it so that you can do an investigation and work in a SOC, no matter really the tools, because rather than being, I'm a CrowdStrike expert or whatever, you just, as long as you can say, how do I look up process executions in the documentation, you now know how to investigate an incident, basically. So both of those really great books. I really recommend reading them. I didn't get into reading until too late into my life, just 10 pages a day. You'll finish it in a little over a week, and it'll really do a lot for your career. Also, big things, threat intel reports. So Chris Sanders recently had a few tweets on something called forecasting. That is an investigative kind of, what would you call it? Ability, I guess would be the best word for it. Basically, a way that an investigator has kind of an idea of what an adversary is going to likely do next based on the evidence at hand. So basically knowing what bad looks like, and then how to identify it in your own network. The way that you really build that up as a skill is by reading threat intel reports. The DFIR report, I recommend everyone read every time they post something new. It's like the gold standard. And that they also have a great kind of format. The most recent one, of course. I meant to show you guys this too. I don't know if you guys saw, but Portswigger found a way to steal passwords. So you might want to update them on Mastodon if you have one. What were we talking about again? Oh, DFIR report. But they actually released one, I think, today on Bumblebee, and they'll do everything. They give you the summary. This is actually just a really great report, but they'll give you things like the exact command executions and stuff, so you can see, what it looks like, what bad looks like, what they do after they get in, what kind of commands that they run. So the way I would take this as an analyst is I would see, okay, so it looks like they're executing run DLL. Maybe I don't know what that is. Pro tip, if you go to Google, a lot of times what I do is just do a, let's just do run DLL 32.exe, and then we'll do a site docs.microsoft.com. And now I can figure out what it is and kind of go from there. Also, there's some other cool stuff like the Walbass project. So if you ever get an alert on something that you're not familiar with, and it's like a Windows process, coming on here can be a great way to kind of figure out what's going on in the alert. It'll kind of give you context about, what it does, sample detection rules, what it looks like to execute certain code, that kind of a thing. So it can be really helpful for context. But yeah, DFIR reports, absolutely gold. Super recommend it. Things like command, or actually, let's see, things like NL test. The way that I would actually take a look at that, if you search your SIM, you don't see any executions of that in the past 30 days or however long your data goes back, create a detector for it. And anytime it detects or goes off, you now have a pretty high fidelity detection for Bumblebee malware. And that's just, one thing off the top of my head. You can also do the same thing with Net, Taskless. Who Am I is ran a lot, but that also has a lot of false positives. You can just take a lot out of here. So let's see. Yeah, I won't focus on this too much more because I got a lot of other stuff to cover. Red Canary also releases a really good report each year. They release their top 20, I guess, techniques that they've observed and how to detect them specifically. And it's always absolute gold. One of the things to be aware of is they are heavily an EDR company, and they actually call this out, which is really nice, but their detections are going to be skewed towards the host and the telemetry that they have, not necessarily the most detections or the most common detections that there are out there. Something to keep in mind. But then, of course, vendor threat intel reports, again, FireEye, CrowdStrike ones, those can all be super helpful for building that forecasting skill. Mastodon and Twitter are both great. I actually really like Mastodon because if you're on the infosec.exchange server, it has a local timeline, and it's just a local timeline of everyone that tweets or toots or whatever you call it on the Mastodon server that you're in. So it's basically like an infosec threat intel feed. It's really neat.
So it's kind of like just that server,
Think of it like a Counter-Strike server back in the 1.6 days, where everyone maybe ran their own server and they knew everybody on that server. But if no one was playing that day, you could go and interact with other people on other servers
All
too.
the servers are federated, so you can interact with anybody that's
Yeah.
on Mastodon, but you get a feed that's for your server. It's really weird.
More like a subreddit then? Like I can go
It,
to the
Yeah, kind of.
server?
Yeah, kind of.
it kind of.
Okay.
You have to. It's the bullshit Morpheus excuse. You have to see it for yourself.
Okay. Terrible, but I love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's it for people. Any questions before we go on to processes?
Yeah. When does Red Canaries? No, I can look this up. You don't need to answer this. Move on.
I think it's more towards the end of the year to answer your question. I'm sure they've released one recently.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just trying
but,
to decide how many or how many different meetings ColaSEC can milk out of doing the DFIR and the.
Adam, if you hit a paywall or something with
a,
that, let me know. I might be able to get a hold of it for you.
a
Okay.
ton.
No, but I did have a thought though, like if we
It's just 12
did a
months
better-
a year. It's just.
oh god no. But if we did a better job of like not just doing the Verizon one, but also like if we did a better job of calling those out in like our
Yeah.
news segment or something.
And maybe curating them a tiny bit instead of just walking through all of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, please.
Well,
Yeah, no worries. So processes, detection as code. This is something you might start hearing a lot more of, but it's also something that people have been doing for a while, but haven't really been talking about publicly until more recently. But we actually wrote a great white paper about this while I was at Soteria, which you can find at that link. And that was actually a real production process that we had for developing our detections as code. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the Soteria website, or I think I even have it online. Yeah, and see what that process is like, kind of how to implement it, etc. But when you're getting started with that, the most helpful thing you can do is just have your security team start creating, I guess, issues in Git, and just getting familiar with Git as a tool. That way, as you start using Git, you can identify, okay, this piece is a pain in the ass to do manually. How can we automate it? And then you just gradually build out your detection as code process.
I want to. Didn't you do a presentation at ColaSEC on this not too long
did.
ago? Okay.
Yeah, about actually it was a long time ago. Geez, that was like 3 jobs ago.
3 jobs or 2 pandemics ago.
But yeah, so that's something you'll probably start seeing more of, but it's also a great way to get started with detection. Another thing with detection is actually really simple if you know how to baseline. And what baselining is basically saying, okay, here, I'm going to go back to that LOLBAS page if I still have it up. Yeah. Let's take this run DLL 32, for example. I might take my SIM and just Google the run DLL 32 process, and then Google all of the different type of command flags and their values. And then even just doing an eyeball, or not Google, but search in my SIM, even just by eyeballing it, say, maybe it never runs in my environment. So just saying, okay, this is a good detector now. Or maybe it runs all the time, but it only runs with maybe like a printer flag in there. That's an easy thing to tune out. Now you have again a high quality detector. So that's really all detection engineering is sparkling baselining. So yeah, it gets a little more advanced than that, but using stuff like this and then the Sigma rule set, which we'll talk about in a bit, is a great place to get started on detection. Any questions? Okay, playbooks. So something that new analysts often struggle with is the need for a playbook for every single individual detector. And that's just not something that's going to happen. It's essentially like telling a detective to give you the exact steps to solve every single crime. And also individual detectors for each playbook doesn't scale at all. The amount of detectors that you'll be able to put out will likely far exceed your ability to write well-written playbooks and maintain those playbooks. So the way that people approach this is they stay more strategic minded with them. So they focus on things like malware, authentication, network IDS, and then you have a few, I guess, more at that level. So going back to, let's see, this Bumblebee report, you know, I'm gonna, let's say I got a detection on that run DLL 32 event, wherever it is. Here we go. Let's just say we detected that right here. Even if we detected PowerShell or some other command, the forensic steps are largely going to be the same. I'm going to just work my way up the process ancestry to get to however it executed. And then if some other process did that, I'm just going to work my way up there. And then, you know, look for any communication or anything that it, you know, any sites or addresses that it may have communicated to. So the processes are really the same, and you'll find that with most paid for SOARs or SOAR platforms that they kind of take that approach too. But that's essentially the kind of approach to take. I've been wanting to actually do a talk on the kill chain specifically and how to use it, because really the kill chain is always going to be your investigative guide, no matter if it's malware or even something like a vishing call where they, you know, you're trying to get them to call back. So it's something that's really powerful to learn once you actually, like, it clicks. And it didn't click for me. I always thought it was an academic way of thinking, but it didn't click for me until my my SANS course on threat intel. So don't feel bad if it doesn't for you, or if it just doesn't seem useful for you. Yeah, it's in the Intel Driven IR book. One other skill that I really pulled out of that was how to think tactically, operationally, and strategically. And that'll really help you communicate up the ladder and know what kind of data is important for your management and so on.
Yeah, I can second that. Like, it really does help when you can reference the kill chains. Like, when your SOC is telling you, hey, this happened or this happened, don't, like, you to be very careful not to use the wrong terminology. Like, use the word threat appropriately, use the word incident appropriately, like, use the word incident. Like, all the terminology is very important when you're talking to management, because they'll go, if you say, oh my god, we had a breach, then your integrity just got destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Breach incident. Those all have meanings.
Yes.
Yeah, you can create a heck of a headache for yourself if you exchange one of the words. Incident is different than event, which is different than breach. You know, as been mentioned, if you say you cannot use those words interchangeably, especially with C-level folks, because number one, they might not necessarily know the difference, and if you use a different word, they're going to start asking questions that you really don't want to have to explain in a C-level meeting. It's not.
All of those words have different meanings in every company, and you need to find out what the vernacular is at your company.
Also that, yes.
Yeah.
Like, you say all of those words to the lawyers at your company, it's going to mean something different than the lawyers at mine.
Yeah, don't say you've been breached if all you have was a drive-by.
Next, was there something else?
No, you're good.
Okay. Next is the process of onboarding just new capabilities in general. So this again was also something that I had to learn while working for a startup, and it came from just kind of an agile product management kind of methodology. But what I've learned is that all of the major kind of SOCs will approach their tool, I guess, purchases and I guess how they onboard logs and what logs that they need to onboard as what they call user stories. So if you just look up the concept of user stories, I think Atlassian has, I don't have it open, but you can Google it. Atlassian has a great article on them. But they'll do things like, let's say, I think I need an EDR. Well, what do I need out of that EDR? I might need, for example, it to be able to isolate a host. As a DFIR analyst, I might need to be able to edit the firewall and the isolation so that it can communicate with my DFIR server. Well, now I just added a new user requirement where if I just go and ask, hey, what's the best EDR? I might have just shot myself in the foot. So it's a great way to actually build and purchase any kind of security tools, and it'll help keep you from just being sold a blinky box. It'll help you find something that's solving the problems that you actually need. So some of the ways that we do this, I think I put it in the general channel the other day, but we're where I work now, going through the process, and we're trying to create just kind of generic user stories for each team on what we would need to do if we were going to onboard some sort of like new technology, whatever, regardless of what it is. And the idea is to stay fairly vague, because you don't want to tie yourself to a specific technology as long as you can get the data. So doing things like, as a SOC analyst, I need to be able to see process execution data on whatever systems are onboarded. So that will work well now in GKE or containers. That could be a requirement, or even on a Windows host. And because I didn't specify a tool. Again, same thing with, I need to be able to see authentication stuff. So when people log in, when authentications fail, it's a time-consuming process. It might take like well, depends on how many people you have in a meeting. Keep it really small, but it's a time-consuming process. But once you have it, you can really reuse it, and it makes onboarding new stuff just so much easier. But it'll also tie things like your individual like logs that you onboard to actual use cases, so you can justify having them, and you're not just having logs go to your SIM doing nothing, which is very common also. So any process or any questions on processes?
I wish we had.
Yeah, I want to highlight your soundbite there of being thoroughly vague. I think that's a good takeaway.
Yes. Cool. So let's go to tech. So I hoped that I could actually put together like almost a diagram, but there are a lot of open source tools that you can use that will make a better detection program than people that even have, all of the best, highest paid for tools. And to give you an example, I know of multiple SOCs that are taking in dozens of petabytes of data per day, and they're just using the free version of Elasticsearch with ElastAlert. Same thing with Graylog. So the big takeaway is, if your license for your SIM is causing you to not ingest logs that you need, and you're not doing anything with it other than, if I see this event, an alert, you can do that with free tools, and a lot of times in a lot better way. So for example, Splunk is known for being one of the better tools, but it's built to be able to ingest data a lot faster, whereas Elasticsearch, if you've ever used it, is a lot quicker on the search speed, but slower on the ingest. So again, unless you have use cases outside of doing a basic detection and storing your logs, paying for a SIM, you're not really getting that much value out of it, most likely. Same thing with SOAR. Before you ever get a SOAR program, so if you're not familiar with SOAR, it stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. Basically, the whole idea behind it is you'll have basically automate your playbooks to a degree, and they have free tools out there. The catch is they're not necessarily specifically for security, but the idea is I can write a piece of code once, and then now I can go back and reuse that code block multiple times, and the people that are closer to the subject matter expertise rather, are the ones building the automation. So you're not losing that contextual stuff whenever you're building out use cases and that kind of a thing. So it's important to have your playbooks identified and actually written out at a strategic level before you get a SOAR. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do much with it, since they don't do magic.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, they don't do much with it unless you have your actual playbooks documented. So they're not magic. Yep. But yeah, so free ones, nation.io, Node-RED, both free. One of the other benefits of going a free route, so I actually used to work on XOR specifically at Palo Alto Networks. And I will say that I feel like XOR legitimately does have the best technology under the hood, but it's also super expensive. And one of the big downsides with it that I saw was the load. So you can basically, when people ask me what's possible with the SOAR, it's really anything that you could do with regular code. So almost anything's possible. It's just whether or not you should do it because of the load that it'll put on it. And one of the benefits of having an open source one is now you can have multiple instances doing multiple things, and you're not necessarily tied to having one instance based off of a license. Something to think about. Also, real quick too, if you don't have a big development team, there's something called Open API. So this is essentially a spec that people follow. And what it does is they'll have something called a Swagger file, which is essentially like a JSON file that an application has, where it says, this API takes a GET request, has this kind of data type for it. And why that's useful is there's tools out there that'll allow you to just automatically generate code to query said API. So you don't even have to necessarily know how to code anymore to create the API calls that you need. And most of the security tooling now uses that. And honestly, I think I gave a secret kind of tip last time about using the Demisto content. So just something to think about.
So going back to that API thing real quick, I have a dumb question that maybe isn't a question, but is maybe an opportunity for yet another standard. Is there anything like the Open API standard for the logs that an application or a system issues? Like, can I get an inventory of all the logs I can expect to receive from a given system?
You would think, and that would be awesome. So anytime I've been asked to give feedback to a product on something that relates to a SOC, that's one thing I always ask for. One benefit if you have Defender, event testing. They have ways to generate events with, hold on, sorry. I'll put it in the Slack channel, but they have ways to generate events on Microsoft Defender, which is nice.
Okay, sure, but that's like one. That's
yeah.
Standard though. That's a I can, if I see this event, Microsoft Defender to fire off this type of event in response.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying.
You're asking for a single format for all event logs.
Can I get a Swagger file that tells me all of the Windows logs that I might ever see, and then I can go through that and go, hey, if I see this, that means bad stuff is happening.
Yeah, actually. So if you use, again, I go back to Elastic just being awesome. They have something called the Elastic Common Schema. Oops. And I think Splunk has something similar, but essentially what it is they define all of the fields to give a kind of a unified approach to, whatever the tool is, I'm going to have a generic field. And then if you have something that's maybe specific to a tool, it has a way to call those out. Oops, my laptop's running low. Hold on, sorry.
This is still a per logging platform. I'm going to have a logging standard where I'm going to take all of the logs that I'm ingesting and I'm going to format them to fit into Elastic or fit into Splunk, and then that is the common reference that I use as a framework. So I still have to do the mountains of work to do that translation system.
Yeah. You can find a lot of that work already done. Yeah, I'm getting back up to bring my charger.
Call it
but yeah, if you have you have tools like malware archaeology, and they have actually, let's see, resources.
And I guess what I'm more, instead of the red team side, or I guess, instead of the detection side of this, I'm more thinking from I'm an engineer building all these systems, and I want a seamless, easy way to have all of my authentication events pop up in Splunk without having to do any additional work. Just here's the file. This tells you what all the events for authentication look like.
So
that doesn't seem to exist.
no, there are layers. I mean, I just posted one in chat that is Microsoft's events to monitor, which I haven't been through all of it, but it is fairly consistent with like the SANS 555. But you're going to implement that in a solution, and your solution is going to vary, and that makes it hard.
The big appeal with MDR and XDR providers, really, and why it's just different than SIM is the idea behind those is they're doing that for you a lot of the times, and on top of the detection. There's one tool I will talk up, and I don't actually typically support individual tools, but there's one called Lima Charlie, which is really awesome because they make a lot of this super easy. And they also have a free tier. You can just go get started and play. You can make a sandbox on the internet if you want with the free sensor. Oh, wait, whoops. So I'm already in there. But what they do is they essentially take all of that management of that kind of log data, and they do that unification for you. And then they make it so that you can automatically ingest Sigma rules from the Sigma repo and run them against your log data, for example.
Yeah, Adam, I think to your point, and this is something that we've kind of struggled with too, is what logs do we need to ingest, right? And so things, individual references like this events to monitor that Jeff pointed out, those are good, but I don't think there's definitely not a standard for logging, if that makes sense, as far as like.
Yeah. So
OpenAPI kind of defines for me like how
I get
defend and protect that API. I want I want these 37 different types of logs from every system that I have, and then just have a thing automatically consume those logs from everything, and it's got some automated standard, and it's producing a Swagger file for its logs, and this thing just crawls through that and like, okay, this log is this log is that, and
that would be awesome, but no.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No. There are some things like that. I don't know. I haven't seen anything that's great or anything that's unified outside of a singular product or maybe a specific set of products. Personally.
I mean, some of your bigger vendors, like Curator, IBM, for instance, right? That would be one of their sells is, oh, we've already got all that defined for you in our DSM. You just enable it, and it, for this product or that product, we've got an integration there. That's one of their sells, but mixed results there.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you the number one log source that you'll get value out of is new process execution logs. So that's event ID 4688 or Sysmon ID 1. That log source alone will let you do the most MITRE attack based like type detections than any other log source. And I honestly hate whenever I go to a place that only has firewall logs, no decryption, and that's all they have. It's really useless. Yeah, you get that from your EDR, Sysmon, but that's the number one most important log because you'll be able to track what executed on a system. And if you use a tool like CrowdStrike and you're writing custom detections, or I think they call them indicators of attack, you're limited to just process execution in the command lines. I think 4688 also takes a registry key pushed out, just FYI, to get the command line included with the process data. Just food for thought. But yeah, just to kind of go on, NSM, Security Onion, I think we're all familiar with that. Again, one of the downsides of relying only on firewall stuff is you typically have NetFlow, and then maybe the IDS alert with it. One of the upsides is they typically have higher fidelity, so they trigger less false positives, but they also have less context to help you investigate in a lot of times. Where as a tool like Security Onion, which is going to run Zeek, will get you a whole bunch of metadata. And one tool that the company I work for makes is on there called Strelka. If you have the capability, it's really awesome. So the idea behind it is it takes all of the files that are pulled out of the network via Zeek, just over the wire, and then shoots them to be scanned by a Yara parser, and gives you all kinds of just general file metadata, unless you run Yara rules across anything that hits your network. So let's say, for instance, you want to mirror the Elastic Yara rule set and have a managed Yara rule set. Now you all of a sudden have a way to run, all these different detectors on everything from Windows for free. So like against your like Maldocs and stuff. So it becomes super powerful, or even just anything else that crosses your sensor.
Question, and maybe a little bit divergent for what you were talking about. So you've talked about kind of the people. What we didn't discuss number of people. Of course, that's going to vary depending on the size of the organization and the monitoring and all that. We've talked about technology, and so I think where my brain turns, and this is somewhat reminiscent of kind of where our SOC is at currently, is we technically have 2 people dedicated as analysts to the SOC, and we're running QRadar, and so it's huge, it's heavy. The sell, of course, is, it does all that for you. It takes care of the tuning. It's already, it saves all the time. All you need is your 2 analysts. Where do you think is the breakover point? Like, where would we consider, is open source more about, is that better for beginning a SOC and then you mature into something like QRadar, or is it the other way around? Maybe you start with something like QRadar that's a off the shelf, it does it for you solution, and then you end up maturing into open source tools.
No, so honestly, in my personal opinion, the open Elastic or Graylog are really the way to go, just because you're gonna not be paying a lot for licensing. You'll pay for support, which will only help you, and that's even optional. And also, you have the benefit of things like they're already being configs because everybody uses Elasticsearch out there for various like tool sets. So hold on, I can't of course find it, but things like the Swift on security sysmon configuration. I'm sure there's like a public Elastic ECS, what do you call it, WinLog beat file configuration just out there that'll automatically parse that and shoot it to your instance, for example. And then you get the benefit of one, for those of you that have never used QRadar or some other kind of paid SIM versus something like a Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is super quick on the searching. It allows you to do a lot of cool visuals, but of course you're also managing it a little bit more. But anyways, to answer your question, my personal opinion is that you should be getting something from your SIM that's more than, if I see this log source trigger an alert, or if I see X log source trigger an alert over 5 times, because honestly, one of the best ones out there is free with that Elasticsearch with ElastAlert. You might have to, with ElastAlert, do some development to get it to ingest to your case management system. But if you use the open source tool, the Hive, that's just like built-in supported.
One of the things about the Hive is it's changed its license, and at least Security Onion has moved to something called Case as a alternative to that because of that licensing change.
Okay, that's good to know. But I guess really to get back to the point, if you're evaluating a paid for SIM, they should be doing something for you that you can't do really out of those yourself, like an Elasticsearch or Graylog too. So some of the ones that I think would, provide value, or some sort of an example would be like, what is it called? The newest version of, I can't remember its name. It doesn't matter, but it basically does some cool like machine learning risk evaluation based on like what the endpoint is and how it's tied in. Or Google's Chronicle. Still a little weak, to be totally honest, but one of the cool things that it does is it's built into VirusTotal, so it gives you that context that you see with the VirusTotal information. So it should be providing you with more value than just here's something to ingest my logs and alert on, because you're going to find probably more support and just people asking and answering questions on something like Elasticsearch because it is so popular. Yeah, that's just my opinion. And also the ECS standard is really well adopted and great. And if you use it, there's a tool called what was it? SOC? No, Uncoder. There's a tool that you can use. You can technically use this for a QRadar too, but essentially you choose what you want the Sigma rule to detect and what your output is. So if it's like Elastic, for example, this is the command you would see. So process.command line, and this is like the ECS standard, for example. So basically, if you follow that standard, you're now automating a detection engineering program, because now you have everybody that's committing content to Sigma, committing content for your SIM. And that includes a lot of the really good detection content makers. And also, to tap onto that, Elastic has open sourced their rule set. You will probably have to kind of translate it a little more, but the logic is pretty easy to kind of follow if you know kind of what you're looking at. It's like process names, process executables, that kind of thing. So just, food for thought on that.
Is there a decent breakover point in people resources that you need, for instance? So, and I know this question is gonna be hard to answer, and I kind of dismissed it earlier by saying, of course, you're going to scale with your organization and all that. But what number of staff would you expect to see for a SOC that's using open source tools versus one that's using paid for tools?
It depends if you consider the people managing an Elastic instance part of the SOC. Like if you're doing Elasticsearch, or if that would be handled by the ops team. So let's just assume that they're going to be managing it. That's typically going to be a 1-2 person job, but that could also, if they're not having another dedicated responsibilities, it could also be potentially an analyst that uses the tool for investigations as well.
So probably 2 people to manage an open source tooled SOC. I say manage to operate, as in do the administrative side, do the engineering side of it, do the care and feeding, and then however many analysts you need to process however many events. So that part's gonna where you need to scale. Okay.
Yep.
Your capability is gonna be proportional to the number of person hours you can throw at.
Right.
One thing too.
Anecdotally, if you told me you were going to pay me $10,000 to set up QRadar, or I was going to be kicked in the chest repeatedly and I'd be able to set up Graylog or Elasticsearch in its place, I would choose option B and take the chest kicking.
Yeah, same.
No, never touching QRadar again.
But I think back to your first slide, David, about like the roles and responsibilities, like to Corey's point, like if all you have is 2 analysts, if you don't have any engineers or implementers, that may be a difficult thing to switch from QRadar to Graylog or Elastic, because all you have is analysts. Like that's it's really a resource problem at that point. It's not a
well, that's a money problem right there, because you're spending how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on QRadar versus
a non-insignificant capital cost to those products.
But if you don't have
But-
any to build
Yeah,
who
but
certainly can't afford it.
yeah,
I can't disclose cost.
If you don't have the engineers to build an outstack, you certainly don't have the engineers or the capital to afford the other option.
Yeah, I
and one of
can't.
the other things that is there is hardware. You have to buy hardware, regardless of whether you have engineers or not,
Yeah.
that can build the tools.
You drop tables, Jeff.
that was going to be my dumb question. Like, QRadar, comes with hardware, quote unquote included. Open source, you've got to, I guess, get your own hardware and then install it.
You got to figure out the storage, because one thing that is really alarming is how rapidly your logs stack up. If you want to maintain logs from all of your systems everywhere all the time, that requires a non-insignificant amount of storage, and you got to have your storage team prepared to handle that load. And a lot of it is rapid access initially, and then you got to have a good architecture for archiving the old logs off and having that cycle down to crappier tiers of storage that aren't as fast,
Right.
but that are cheaper for you. Like, there's a lot of engineering that goes into that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason Splunk is the only vendor that anyone wants to deal with in this space.
Yeah. Well, and since we're talking about architecture, let's not forget prod versus DR. And if you're going to have a hot site or a cold site, and how that failover works, and then where those, again, we go back to log storage. Then do you keep the hot logs? Yeah. Yeah.
Here's something I'll tell you guys. One thing that you'll probably want to put in front of your SIM, regardless of what it is, if you can, is a cool tool called Kafka. It was originally developed by Twitter as a way to ingest rapid events. Excuse me. The benefit is, of course, if you are limited on your events per second that you can ingest on a SIM, you won't drop any events. And then also, it is cheaper to store data long-term in Kafka than it is in your SIM, most likely, and it allows you to retain that data longer in Kafka. And then if you ever need to go back and pull it out, you can shoot it back over to your SIM, if that makes sense. So it's also a free tool. It's one that I see in front of most stuff, or most of the big SIMs, just again, because they want to avoid dropping events. And that's a way to kind of make sure you essentially, quote unquote, catch them as they come out.
So yeah, we're working with a third party SOC for 24/7 coverage, and we've got a Kafka ingest point. So all of our stuff on campus gets sent to that Kafka instance, and then they pull that from it. So yeah, it's a great tool to do all that sort of.
So Kafka can become your log or event collection point, and then you can mirror that off to separate SIMs if you wanted to. So for instance, if you we had Security Onion for a while and we abandoned it because of the first off, the amount of effort we were putting into QRadar as our SIM, and then nobody, it just got abandoned pretty much. But you could have used Kafka to send those events to both SIMs without having to. You can with QRadar, I believe, as well, be able to, route everything to QRadar, use it as the event collection point, and then route it over. But that gives you that third party kind of in front of it, like you're saying.
Yep, exactly.
I have a couple of questions. First, how much of your presentation is left?
This is the last slide.
Oh, cool. Then I'm going to go ahead and ask my next question. I am starting from zero, or I've got a SOC that's in place and I don't really particularly care for the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know which thing to build first? Like, this is a fantastic list, but do I start from the top down? Like, what's the most important? How do I know that?
Yeah, so it's gonna depends. Honestly,
I call that the worst answer you can ever give, but the most appropriate that's ever available.
If I had to be honest, if there was one thing I was going to come in and do from a, my SOC sucks, I just want to start over and focus and just kind of reorient.
This is your starting point.
Yeah, I would, my personal place would be getting in place monitoring around process execution. Maybe that's your EDR, maybe that's just collecting Windows event logs, maybe it's both. Just FYI, sometimes, so with EDR tools, you often get more of an what's called an endpoint protection tool or in next-gen AV, and then at a higher licensing tier, you get the quote-unquote EDR, where they actually send you all of the event logs and we can write custom rules. It can be cheaper to use that low license tier to get the next-gen AV and still use Sysmon to get you the logs that you need to build your detections on. Food for thought. Not always the case, but commonly.
So the takeaway there was get the endpoint events. If that's through Sysmon, great. If that's through your EDR tool, great. Whatever you do there, but to kind of start there.
Yeah, start with me. It's process execution. Again, that goes back. You get the most MITRE ATT&CK coverage. It doesn't require an agent. You can send Windows event logs off with the Windows Event Forwarder built into Windows, and you'll be able to do most of your detection. Again, you'll be able to figure out a lot of what's malicious. One of the things that you'll run into problems with is with new process is you'll be able to determine if it's malicious or not really quickly, but you might not necessarily be able to figure out what it does, and that's where a tool like Velociraptor comes in, and that's also free, and that's used by 2 or 3 of the last MSSPs that I worked for, so it's a really widely supported tool, but it's super easy to use, and you can deploy it. Literally takes like 2 seconds. But if you have that set up ahead of time, it could be as simple as, I've detected something on a Windows event log. I've put that system on a network that can only communicate with my Velociraptor server. And now my analyst is pulling things like the master file table, the process logs dumping. It actually, so for those that aren't familiar with it, let me pull it up. Velociraptor. It is absolutely dope. But yeah, so it will break them down so you can find things just like, hashes, PowerShell executions. It's just, they make it really easy to pull data that you might think you need. Oops.
Can I infer something from your starting location then?
Yes.
You're focused then on the largest attack surface, which is the user workstations.
Well,
and servers too.
Yeah, I was going to say it's anything that executes a process, really.
Okay, that's fair.
So I would say that your traditional ideas of network monitoring and kind of that net flow idea is good, but more and more we're moving to encrypted channels, and
you can't see what's on the wire anyway.
Yeah, so the endpoint is where you see it. So you see it before the encryption happens, and that's key.
Yeah, to be honest, a lot of times I don't even need, I don't want to say need, but I don't necessarily need network data at all to do an investigation, just because so much of it is encrypted these days, and it's so expensive and difficult to get it decrypted right.
So would you say then that PCAP is gravy?
What was that?
The PCAP is just gravy then?
Yeah, if you have PCAP, that's awesome. And also, FYI, Microsoft is building Zeek into Windows Defender. Might be only the paid version, but you'll be able to get individual endpoint metadata. So let's say an event triggers, you can now start collecting bro events.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. They haven't said a whole lot about where it is.
Yeah.
We've had some conversations internally because we're deploying Microsoft Endpoint for Defender, and right around the time that they announced the Zeek piece, a new department went in, and like the logs just got crazy, and we had some back and forth with that, and it looks like it's Zeek telemetry data, which is not like high volume data, and so that's kind of interesting to see how that's going to play out, but it's great.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm a little bit, so I guess surprised by some of the technology that you've got in this list. I mean, I can't admit to not having flirted with the idea of Windows Defender's NGAV. I mean, that's if you're a Windows shop, you've got Windows Defender, so that gives you your AV.
Well, let me say this on it. I actually reached out to a guy named, I don't know his real name, D-Swizzle or whatever on Twitter, who is the head of Microsoft OS security, and asked him if the paid Windows Defender like EDR that would be in like the E5 license, if the detection engine that's just doing like your static file detection or whatever, or your next gen AV detection was the same as just this plain old Windows Defender. He said yes, or he's like 99% sure. He hadn't been on that team for a while.
Well,
so from a, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The only thing that you would lose, of course, is when you're not paying for it, is the EDR type data and some of the other kind of tools that maybe make it easier to manage an endpoint or like deploy Velociraptor, for example. It's that kind of capability.
From what we're seeing in our deployment so far is that the Defender, the AV portion of Defender just kind of plugs into stuff. It's there no matter what. The EDR piece that you deploy is a active stub for all the things that you want to enable into that environment, and it becomes kind of the query engine at the OS level. And so you're pulling all that data, you're just pulling all that data in through the endpoint Defender. And it's kind of interesting. And you said just having to be, or not you, David, I think Corey asked just having to be in Microsoft. It runs on Mac OS and it runs on Linux, and we're doing some testing. It's not as prolific in the information it has for Mac OS nor Linux, but it's getting there.
Yeah, E5 licensing does have some additional cloud detection and cloud response kind of stuff, but yeah, it's the engine on the endpoint should be the same.
Yeah, the big piece I wanted to get out of that is you will have this same kind of like detection engine that powers the paid for like EDR version. So if you don't need all of those other features, if that's, you already have an EDR, maybe you just want to use event logs, like you're not gonna necessarily lose out on your detection capability, if that makes sense. To give you a good example, I used to was forced to use Cylance for a really long time. And it was very common for Defender to catch the stuff and Cylance to just never see it ever. So it's really good. And you gotta remember they have like all of the Windows data ever to build these kind of things. So it's just a really solid choice.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going down that road because we kind of have to, but it's been interesting to see how Microsoft is supporting that and like giving free information away from the security side and allowing alerts and talking about things that are happening on the endpoint. So it's kind of interesting to see. We'll see how it goes long term, but.
Yeah, what a lot of people will do for a paid EDR is they don't necessarily want to have to manage all of the Windows events. So for example, they will just shoot over an alert to their SIEM and then detect off that alert and do the investigation in an EDR. That's also obviously perfectly fine, just other ways of doing it.
We're looking at that, extracting the alert data from basically Microsoft Sentinel and forwarding it to that 24/7 SOC, and then they'll just tell us when it happens. So
yeah, my AirPods are dying, so I think this is the wrap.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's as good a place as any, and honestly, we're at times. So
yeah,
thank you. This was very good.
Yeah, if y'all have any questions, just ping me in Slack.
Will do.
Absolutely.
All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.
events to sysmon, and the sysmon log has a finite size that is actually large. But the fun fact is that Task Manager logs events to sysmon for every single process that's running, because it's literally your user ID going and interrogating each of those processes to find out how much memory is allocated and all of that.
That is awesome. The first thing you do is run Task Manager.
Right, but do you see where this is going? So the payload deploy event in the lab that I was doing, like I went and found it, I saw it, and then I watched it just walk out of the Windows event log and just out of existence forever because I had Task Manager open. And yeah.
That's brilliant. So you don't need Procmon or any of that bullshit on top of that. You just open Task Manager.
Yeah, but when you open Task Manager, it erases the sysmon event log is what I'm getting at. So before you open Task Manager, you should go into sysmon and like, hey, whatever your max log size is, ignore that. Just fill up the C drive. I don't give a shit. I want all the logs.
Yeah.
And then you can open Task Manager and let it fill up the logs.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because because it's gonna log the event where something started a PowerShell process, and you want that. And if you don't do it, it'll cycle through the maximum event log size and poof, out of existence.
Unless you got a collector out there
that's capturing all of the logs, but if the collector has to be capturing all of the logs from all of your systems. And if you're working on an endpoint, well, sorry.
Yeah. So if you got command of like 3 endpoints, you could do that and just flood everything.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was my weird anecdote that I was thinking about for the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
This is fun though. I enjoyed this presentation.
It's weird. We never ever thought that we really wanted to move to the endpoint to do logging, and it started slowly happening over the last few years, and now all of a sudden we're like in a race to get endpoint logging because everything else is.
That's where everything happens, though.
And out of curiosity, is that endpoint, like, are you looking to do